Jedi mind trick.
All right. How are we doing? Good morning.
Woo! Hello, everyone. Show
Glad
of hands for
you're
any
here.
Groot people.
I am Groot.
Show of hands for any
Good.
Gollum people. All right,
Mixing it up.
Yeah.
It's good. Well, hopefully that made you think because we're talking about communication today. But before we do that, we should let you know who we are. I'm Kurt.
And I'm Katie.
And we are the co-lead pastors here at Restoration. And we're so glad that you are joining us. If you're here in the building, welcome. If you're joining us online, welcome to you as well. And we're in the middle of this series called Love in the Time of Corona. And the reason we're doing this series is because relationships are hard. They're hard anyways, right? And then you throw it in a 2-year global pandemic, and things just get crazy, right? And so we've decided it's good for all of us, whether we realize it or not, whether we're in any stage of relationship that we're in, it's important for us to take an inventory, to ask the question, how has these last 2 years affected our closest relationships, affected us, right? And how can we benefit from actually pausing and seeing what God might have to say about it? And so last week, we kind of dove into the topic of marriage and partnership. We kind of dove deep into that idea and looked at what does it mean that God says about marriage and what does that mean for us? How do we stay in love for the long term? And we talked about what do we bring to our relationships. So the first week, how do I bring a healthy me to whatever we looks like? And so if you missed any of those messages, check them out on our YouTube page. It's been a fun series. And today we're talking about communication.
Yeah.
And it would be really easy for one of us to just talk about all the tips and tricks of how to be a great communicator and just kind of tell you all the things you need to know and just, feel like a pro and go from there, right?
Yeah.
But we decided we would team teach this one because we like a challenge. And because isn't that true? Isn't that how it works in all of our lives? When I come to any relationship, my guess is you're the same way. We come to a relationship thinking, I'm great at communication. But then there's always the other person, and I'm not pointing at you, just there's another person in the relationship that we have to communicate with, and all of a sudden it becomes more challenging, right? And so that's what we're diving into today. So before we do that, though, we realized that there was some feedback we got from last Sunday's message that we just really wanted to address it as a church, as your pastors. We care about what we say on stage, and so we just wanted to let you know. After last Sunday's message, we got
a lot of requests.
A lot of feedback that people really wanted to see pictures of how this got started, right? So,
so we're gonna give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want. Deep, profound teaching, but they just want to see pictures
kind of messed up, man.
of us in the 2000s, right?
So feedback, if anyone wants to see some early season 1 of the K&K show, this was dating. This was dating. Look at the
I rocked the goatee
soul
well
patch,
beyond an
Justin
appropriate
Timberlake
time.
hair, earrings, whole bit. This was engaged, so 2.0, engaged K&K.
It's good.
Oh, beach, so good. This was wedding day,
there it is,
K&K.
big day.
There it is.
Someone
there
in the back didn't know they were in a picture, but that's okay.
Yeah, it's all good.
It's all good.
This was some kind of thrift store date.
Ministry,
I don't know, student ministry
days. Yeah. Those pants are pretty in style.
I know.
Still,
Should bring that. Okay, then we kind of grew up and became actual adults and wore
adults.
real clothes and planted a church in Chicago, and so
that was the nicest shirt I owned at the time.
No more soul patch, no more
good.
goatee.
Yeah.
Clean shaven, like a decent human.
Still look like a baby.
There you go.
Yeah,
Looking good.
So,
awesome.
There you are.
You're welcome. We receive feedback. All the emails, all the requests. Because we're responsive pastors.
There you go.
But through all of that, all jokes and funny pictures aside, these early days, we've learned a lot since those days. There's been lots of ups and downs and everything in between, and we learned how to communicate with one another over the last 2 decades. Sometimes effectively, other times not so much. We've definitely learned from the failures as much as from the wins. But we're just excited to share with you guys a little bit today of just what has been some of the hard-earned wisdom, some of the ways that we've taken God at His word and how that's paid off in our lives. And also, to just share some of the epic fails as well, because we all grow and learn from the best.
We did not start out as naturally great communicators. I mean, we were 19 when we met. And so the amount of passive-aggressive AOL instant messenger away messages that I left.
Any AOL instant messenger peeps?
Yep, yeah. Anyone born
We're
after
showing our age here.
1990 doesn't know what we're talking about. But I mean, dashboard confessional lyrics are good for two things: singing sad in the shower and AOL instant away
Making
message.
someone feel real awesome on the
when
receiving end of the secret away
good.
message.
So we went through that season, and if you don't know what that is, it's this thing where you can just leave a message for someone and hope that they intuit the frustration that you feel, right? And that was like the beginning of our dating experience, and so that was where we are now. But we've come a long way since then, and it's been a lot that's going on. And when we come to the idea of communication, there's a lot that we have had to embrace, and things we've learned that we realized we brought into our relationship without even realizing it.
Yeah, a lot of what we brought into our relationships, things that are still alive and at work in our relationship. It's crazy that, a relationship kind of zeroes you in on all the areas where you need to learn and grow. And oftentimes the recycled fights now, even 2 decades later. But as we live and work and have our lives, some of the hang-ups when it comes to our relationships, when it comes to our communication, some are unconscious, some we don't even realize. We don't even realize whether it's from our family of origin or some wound from our past, or something that we just believe about ourselves that maybe we don't even remember who said the thing, but for whatever reason we've held on to that belief. So some of those are conscious, some are unconscious. They definitely not only affect us, but affect the other person, when we are in a relationship together. And we also, when those dynamics come into play within a relationship, there are dynamics, there are ways we learn to just react and respond to one another. And so as we said, through all of this, God has taught us so much through all the bumps and bruises, through all the failures and flaws along the way. His grace has been something, we're fortunate that has just held us. There's plenty of humble and honest work that we've done with therapists, with mentors, lots of therapists. Knowing us, we needed it. But lots of hard-earned communication and strategies and ways that we've, gotten sharpened in the process. And so we're excited to share some of that and how we navigate the big feelings discussions, AKA fights.
Yeah, we
Call
all
it what
have
it
them.
is.
So whether it's in a romantic relationship, a work relationship, a roommate situation, so you move into a new neighborhood and you realize at first that neighbor is awesome, but then they get really, really picky, right? All of us, theoretically speaking, all of us have those moments where we've come into a recognition that, man, there's something at odds in a relationship. We are not communicating clearly. And Dr. John Gottman, who's a world-renowned marriage and family therapist, and his organization has done years and years of research on relationships, specifically on relational breakdowns. Where do we lose each other in relationships? Their research determined, don't miss this, 70%, almost 70% of conflicts in relationships are never solved or resolved. That we just keep having the same fights over and over and over again, right? Same stuff, different day, right? And when we fight about those same things, right, which in the moment they always feel unique and like surprising, but if you think about it, right, we have learned patterns that show up in our communication, show up in all of our relationships. And so our hope today is that as we learn some communication tools from the scriptures, that you and I all of us would be able to communicate better in those relationships that we're in, and those intense moments would not only become perhaps less common, but less scary as well, and we would actually grow through that conflict.
Yeah, so here's kind of what we're hoping happens, in your relationships today, is that as we discuss communication, that there would be this shift in all of our relationships, whether you're single, whether you're dating, whether you're married, whether you're, navigating a hard season in your marriage, or whether you find yourself, single again. Our hope is that we can get better with communicating with others across all those different areas of our lives and how we speak to one another, because communication is equal parts speaking and saying what you're trying to communicate, as well as receiving the communication that is being shared with you, right? That dynamic is constantly at play. And so we truly believe that as this communication, this giving and receiving happens, that our relationships inevitably improve when we're paying attention to what's happening within our communication. But if we really want to do that, it's going to take more than just trying harder. Because if we could do better, right? If we were like, okay, we're just going to will this into existence, that we're going to be these awesome communicators, right? If it just came down to trying harder, we would have done it by now, right? Because if we can do better, we would have done better. We'd have solved it by now. But if you truly, if we, want to truly have transforming relationships, if we don't want to get stuck in the same patterns and the same fights, to have the same misunderstandings, the same hurt feelings, right? The same things over and over again, we've got to understand that in every relationship, just like what we talked about that first week, that both people have work to do. Yeah. I have work to do. You have work to do. Yep. We have work to do, right? Not assigning blame, simply stating the obvious. Every single one of us has work to do. And if we want to have healthy relationships, we got to be able to step into that humble space of learning, right? And each new season of our relationship, including coming out of 2 years of pandemic, presents us with an opportunity and an invitation to step into the new, to learn all over again, to find what those subtle nuances are that we might need to pick up with in our own relationship. So, real relationships are hard, but they are actually harder if we're not willing to do our work, right? Starting a relationship, right? If you think back to the beginning of your relationship, when I look at that sweet, sweet picture of cute, sweet, naive baby Kurt and Katie falling in love at the beach in Santa Barbara, riding our bikes to class every day, right? They were so sweet, and falling in love was so easy back then, right? Think back to maybe the beginning phase of your relationship when it's easy and there's butterflies and romance and first dates, right? Or maybe it's even thinking of a new job, right? When it's getting to know all these new coworkers and it's exciting and they haven't burned you yet, your BFFs, and you want to go on vacation together, and then, a couple months in, you're like, ooh, never mind, right? Or maybe it's a new house or a new neighborhood. Anytime you're in this beginning season, this beginning phase of a relationship, it's so much easier. It's so much more fun. You don't know the flaws. You haven't bumped into each other's rough patches. There's no scars or bad habits yet. But as we grow in relationships, as you do, we get more familiar with each other, right? We start to see those flaws. We start to see all of the ways that you're like, whoa, you do that totally different than I do, as backwards as it might feel to navigate, you get into the real deal with people. It's easier to start assuming things about them, right? Or it's easier to assume that the way you're doing it is right, and they need to get with the program and figure out if this is going to work, here's how we need to, right? We start to get into these patterns of assuming that our person maybe sees the world the way that we do. And then we come to find out that they don't. Uh-oh. Okay, how are we going to navigate this? And so we value things. As we get into things, we discover what the person values. All of that is the important work to do in discovering how to communicate effectively with one another. The ways we assume, the ways we communicate, so paying attention to those cues. But here's the big idea that today we're going to kind of get down to the bottom of it. So we're going to kind of give you the big idea up front and then unpack it a little bit. Healthy communication asks curious questions instead of assuming assumptive stories, instead of writing assumptive stories. All right? Healthy communication asks curious conversations instead of writes assumptive stories. All right, this is important because every single one of us, right, as humans, we're so wired to be drawn towards narrative, to be drawn towards a story. And if we're not careful, this dynamic happens in our relationships. If there's a missing piece or something goes uncommunicated, we'll fill in the reason. We'll fill in the gaps that we have. And a lot of times assume, and that assumption, that writing of story sets us off into a cyclical hurtful pattern. It's important to stay curious, to stay open, to stay humble, and to ask the question, if I don't understand, how am I going to approach that? So.
Yeah, and I think you had such a good point of saying, isn't it counterintuitive that the longer we're with someone, the easier it is to assume things about them? Right? You think it would be the opposite. Oh, I don't know someone, I'll fill in the gaps. Yeah. But actually, what research has shown, and many of our own, unofficial experiential research has demonstrated, is that the longer we're with someone, the harder it is to stay curious because we fill in those narratives. And so, what's exciting is that this actually isn't a new problem, right? I mean, it's exciting. It's helpful that this isn't actually a new problem, right? People have been dealing with this for thousands of years. And in fact, the Apostle Paul, in the same book that we read from last week in the book of Ephesians, where he does this huge manifesto on what it looks like to have great relationships, actually talks about this. So if you have a Bible, you can turn to Ephesians chapter 4. If you want to grab the blue Bible in the seat back pocket directly in front of you, you can grab that one, and it's on page 706. Again, we're starting in verse 21 of Ephesians chapter 4. And again, this is the Apostle Paul, a follower of Jesus in the first century, writing a letter to this group of people trying to love and follow Jesus in the midst of an influential, sophisticated port city in the Middle East, right? So it's, similar context to us. People that were, they brought into their life an assumption, an experience, a way of doing things, and now they've met Jesus, and he's saying, hey, things actually need to change. And so we're going to pick it up in verse 21. It says this: since you have heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which was corrupted by lust and deception. So what Paul is saying is this old way of doing things for yourself, lying to get your own way, just meeting your own needs, that kind of hedonistic experience that we all have fallen into at times. Paul says actually because Jesus has done something in your life, that gets to go away. And now there's a new way that we can live. There's a new path forward. And he says, instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and your attitudes, right? Isn't it interesting that so easily for us, we want to come to Jesus to change our beliefs, right? We want to change our behavior. But Paul says it starts with your thoughts, how you think about things, and your attitude, specifically when it comes to your relationships. So put on your new nature, for you were created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. And now he gets super practical. He goes, so if you want to have good relationships, you can just write this down. Stop telling lies, right? Seems obvious enough, right? But it's more than just, overtly lying, but like, are you truthful, right? Do you share the whole story? Or do you manipulate the truth to get what you want, right? Let us tell our neighbors the truth, he says, for all of us are actually part of the same body. But remembering who we are helps us try to not take advantage of each other. He says, and don't let the sun go down on your anger, right? He goes, don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry, because that gives the enemy a foothold in your life. Yeah. It says, if you're a thief, quit stealing, but instead use your hands for good work and give generously to others in need. Don't use foul or abusive language, right? That goes beyond just don't swear, right? But let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. And don't bring sorrow to God's Holy Spirit, he says, by the way that you live. For remember, he has identified you as his own, guaranteeing that you will be saved on the day of redemption. Paul does this so often. We've talked about this every week of this series. Anytime he gives us a relational, command or direction to go, he always ties it back to what God has already done for you and for me. And then he brings it home and wraps it up. He says, so get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. But instead, be kind to each other. Yeah. Be tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as, there's that phrase again, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. Now imagine if that description defined the tone of your home, or your relationship with your roommate, or your office culture, right? If that was how we had relationships. Again, it sounds so easy on paper, but in the moment, right? To not take advantage, to not tell lies to get what we want, to not skirt around hard truths, to have grudges and have our hearts get hardened rather than offering tenderness and forgiveness to one another. This is so much more challenging than it is to just read it, right? To actually do it is so much harder. So how do we do that? How do we take that invitation?
I mean, to truly take this invitation from the scriptures and apply it into our everyday relationships, right? Not just our marriage, but all the ships, all the relationships. How do we know how to get better at communication in our relationships? How do we actually do that with the people that matter most to us? So what we want to do is kind of build off of this wisdom that we see in the scriptures, and to kind of give some everyday framework of how we can actually do that. And This is something this is a framework that, back in the day, those 20-year-olds that were just stumbling, fumbling their way through, trying to figure out. This is a tool that I wish we had way back then. This is some language.
I would trade the goatee for this.
I would trade the goatee and the earrings for what I'm about to share. But there's no goatee needed in order to step into this wisdom. And this is something that has truly just revolutionized our communication. It's revolutionized the way that we see one another and see ourselves in the midst of some of our drama, let's be real. When we get into those dramatic moments, this language has really given us some anchors. So we call it the drama triangle. We did not create it. It's something, that has been, I think Psychology 1, maybe the first class where we met each other.
What shape is the drama triangle?
It's a triangle, believe it or not.
Whoa,
So there we go. There we go. There we have the triangle. And we're going to introduce you to a few of the characters that live on this triangle. So think about your relationships and think about some of your interactions with people, because you've probably met some of these characters too. Maybe some of you are these characters. So the first character on the drama triangle is the villain. All right? The villain takes up residence on the drama triangle. Then we have the victim, right? The victim is also a member of the unholy trinity of the drama triangle. Every victim needs a villain, and then we also have the hero, right? The hero also is part, that is your favorite. So to give a little bit of a description, you're like, okay, great words, but how does this actually show up, right? Maybe, trigger warning, some faces, some people might be about to pop into your mind as we give these a little bit of description, but we're going to start with the villain. So the villain's number one move and tactic is to cast shame. All right, villains cast shame. A villain's, secret weapon is to, make the other feel less than, to make the other see all the things that are wrong about themselves, right? All jokes aside, if you've been in an abusive relationship, this has most likely been the number one dynamic at play. One person in the relationship makes the other feel so small that all they can see is the power of the other. So that's in the most extremes of unhealthy relationships. But it can be subtle too. It can be, not as overt in the ways that shame gets cast when we find ourselves in a relationship like this. Moving over to the victim assigns blame. So the victim, maybe you either have been or know someone, you've been in a relationship with someone who always finds a reason outside of themselves of why the problem is happening. Right. It's either the other person's fault or a circumstance's fault. The victim often struggles to take responsibility, to have the self-awareness, to see that they are also bringing something into the situation that's making it difficult for both of you. So that's the villain or the victim. And then the hero. The hero seeks fame, all right? That's the number one power move by the hero. The hero oftentimes has kind of a grandiose, maybe like a megalomaniac, Jesus complex even, maybe. They see themselves as the one that's going to fix it for everyone. That's why sometimes husbands, if you're in a situation where your wife or your partner is sharing something with you and you give a bunch of reasons of what she could do to fix it, that's why you're oftentimes met with, or some kind of other expletive.
Wait, that's not helpful?
That's not helpful.
This is brand new information.
This is brand new information, right? The hero, you don't have to fix it. It's not your job. Sometimes just sitting and listening and putting that little hero instinct to the shelf for a minute can oftentimes be the only thing that the relationship needs is a little breathing room. And so this kind of communication, I know as we kind of introduce these, maybe you see some of these dynamics that come out in your relationship, or maybe you're early in your relationship and it's only just kind of like yellow flags. Maybe some of you are like, red flag over here, nudging the person next to you. But seriously, like we talked about last week, any of these tools we give you, we're meant to have you approach them as if looking in a mirror, not necessarily a magnifying glass, right? To not be holding this up to the other person that you're in relationship with to see, oh, this is how you do that, but to really hold it as a mirror and to say, how is this revealing to me areas, where I need to grow? Where do I tend to land on this drama triangle? Because we all do it.
Yeah.
Because we're all human. Because we all have a tendency to write stories when there's a misunderstanding, when we don't have all the information, or maybe we have 7 facts of the story, but it's that 8th one that if we knew that 8th piece would change everything, right? And so this kind of communication, right, when we are stuck in the drama triangle, creates what Dr. Dan Allender, who's a theologian, a therapist, a professor, he calls them DMZs, all right, which stands for a demilitarized zone, right? If there are any military people in the room, you know what this means. It's basically a no-fly zone. It means it's, in our relationship setting, for us, our DMZs are any of those spaces where we know, ooh, if I even tiptoe into this territory, it's going to be an instant fight, so I'm just going to stay away. I'm going to walk away from it. I'm going to not engage. I'm going to avoid.
Yeah, we don't talk about Bruno.
We don't talk about Bruno. But one of the things that Dan Allender actually says that was so helpful for us, as we started getting into the real deal, was you can assess the health of your relationship by simply asking, how many DMZs do we have?
Oh,
I know,
awful.
it hurts so good. It's worth the work, friends. But for reals, if there are spaces in your relationship where you just would rather avoid to keep the peace, that sounds kind of nice on the surface. But when you start getting into the deeper spaces, man, it's like trying to force a beach ball underwater. That baby's going to pop out at the worst time, and then you're going to be like, ooh, let's just deal with this.
And you just decide that relationship never goes any further.
Right.
And again, for us, we were 6 years into marriage when we were at that marriage conference when he said that, and it was just like, oh my gosh, like this is so revealing.
Yeah.
But this is true with work or roommates or any other relationship you have. Whenever you say, oh, we're just going to not address those DMZs, you're just saying, this is as far as I want that relationship to go, which in some cases might be fine, but for our most intimate relationships, we have to admit, we have to talk about the DMZs.
Totally. And so to know, where are the relationships where the healthier or appropriate boundary is to say, okay, maybe we don't go there. But when it comes to marriage, just to lean in a little bit, to open up the marriage vulnerability vault a little bit, for us, to share an example, which we ran this by each other ahead of time. We're not just flying off the cuff. But one of the biggest DMZs for us kind of comes around like healthy eating and like physical fitness and how we're going to kind of manage that in our household. And the reason why, you're like, that doesn't sound that hard, like meal plan and get a gym membership, no big deal. But the reason why
if only it was that
easy, right? Here we are 20 years later still figuring it out. But the reason why for both of us, when we actually get down under the surface, is that it's because that there are some very deep triggers there for us. There's some very deep insecurities. There's some very deep wounds, some work that we've done to overcome body image and shame and, eating disorders. And so something that on the surface seems like, oh man, like we'd crush it if that was our biggest struggle. But one of the uniquenesses for us is that, when I'm not functioning in, taking responsibility, doing the inner work, checking in with me. If it's just one more round of like, we're getting rid of all the carbs in the house and, we're going to rearrange our schedule and prioritize this and I need you to do it with me so that you're like supporting me and not taking me down, right? So this is the dark hole that we go down.
Right into the drive-thru
right into In-N-Out Burger, right? But when we're able to say, hey, like I actually need to take 100% responsibility for the 50% of this that I bring into our relationship, and to not expect you to do this my way. This becomes something that we've actually like grown in a lot, but has caused many a fight and many a sad day in our marriage.
Which of course I solved by eating junk food. Right. Another one that we talk about a lot for us is money. And maybe you have this DMZ as well. Like we're just gonna like not talk about it. And we've been fortunate to have great mentors and parents that have taught us about money. So we've never really been in a situation where it's been like, oh my gosh, we're out of money, unless we knew we were about to plant a church and get to a point where we were out of money.
That happened too.
But, specifically around spaces where there's a new thing in the budget, right? You just come off the holidays, right? And so, like many of you, more money was spent in December than other months average, for us in our budget. So we negotiated with our budget and moved some things around to make it happen. But then I remember feeling like that tension. There was at one point in December, and it's like, way to go, Kurt, way to bring the holiday spirit, where we just had like, hey, we got to have a money conversation. It's like, oh, no. And it's so easy for me to notice all the Amazon boxes that are showing up at our house and to have an absolute blind eye to the $5 latte I had that morning. Like, let's just be honest, right? It is so easy for me to go, what, all this stuff, and we already have a nativity set, we need 3 more, whatever, right? And again, to totally miss where I'm just spending money, and I didn't check in. And that's just how we've set up our budget. We don't have to check in about money, but when we have those conversations, to go like, how do we, I'm bringing anxiety to this conversation that really is a DMZ, because I don't want to talk about what I might bring to it. I just want to point blame. And so I'm on the drama triangle. I'm spiraling, right?
Yeah.
So how do we actually shift, right? It's good to know the drama triangle exists. That is great step 1, right? To acknowledge that. But if you, like me, want to get off of the drama triangle, you need to shift off of it. The goal is not to move from villain to hero, okay? That's what I used to think the path was. Just don't be a jerk, be a fixer, right? That's actually not that helpful. And it actually can avoid, really doing the work that we all need to do. So how do we shift? Rather than just moving around the drama triangle, we want to get off of that, drama by communicating with curious questions rather than assumptive stories like Katie mentioned before. And so how do we do that? The first step, this is rocket science, sent from God, spiritual information that you're just never going to guess, but stick with us, right? The first step is to check out our stories. To check out your stories. To ask yourself, as you feel yourself, as I feel myself, spiraling about why this is happening and justifying all of my feelings about it, to ask the question, is this even true? Like, is this story that I'm telling myself even factual? And if I think it is, because of course I think it is, I'm a rational human being and so are you, right? How do I know it's true? How do I know it's true? To push that second question is really what matters, because then you go, wait, what happened in our life that made me know that I know that this is true? And I think this is why when Paul says, hey, stop lying to each other, we kind of giggle and go, well, yeah, of course. But how many times do I justify my actions because of what I've told myself, rather than pausing to check out, hey, is this story true? And when I find out that perhaps that story may not be completely fabricated and false, but it's not fully true either, then I can ask the question, what made me write that story? What happened in my circumstances that may have been an indicator of, oh, this something's not right here, but also what's happening in me that made me want to write that narrative to feel better because I had that story in my arsenal going into this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, that starting with your stories, right? Checking your stories, that's so huge. The next step, which is so important, just this is one of the ones where I'm like, you can't skip this next one we're about to say, is to check in with yourself, right? To not just check the story, but to also check in with yourself, right? What am I feeling? Okay, I've named this story. I've asked if it's true. I've asked what contributes to this story, but how does that make me feel? What memories are coming to the surface as I'm feeling all of these things? What led me maybe to write this story in the first place, right? Am I in a place mentally, emotionally, relationally, if it's causing tension, right? Where am I in the process, right? Checking in with yourself is huge, because not being in a place personally to be able to step into a healthy dialogue, a healthy conversation can actually end up doing more harm if we don't first check in with what is happening within me first. And to really get down to the bottom of asking yourself, kind of like the last question that I usually check in with myself when I'm doing this self-check is, am I motivated towards healing and restoration right now? Am I wanting it to be solved and resolved? Or am I still ruminating and stewing over being right? Right? Those are that's a very defining question, because if I'm still stewing, if I'm still just like in a place with it, I won't bring a healthy self into a conversation to be able to have an effective conversation. So checking in with yourself is huge when it comes to shifting off of that drama triangle.
Yeah, because otherwise you'll just like get mad because you wrote a story.
Yeah.
Then you'll get mad that your story's not true.
Mad that I'm mad.
And now I'm mad that I'm mad.
Yeah.
I'm going to blame you that I'm mad, right? So
Yeah.
check your stories, check in with yourself, and then check up on your relationship, right? And again, a check up on a relationship always recognizes that there are at least two people in that relationship, and you have control over one of them, and it's not the other person, right? That you actually have control over yourself. And so I'm checking in on my story. Like, I'm feeling anxiety about this. What's the story I'm writing? I'm checking on myself. Do I feel okay? Okay, I feel okay to have this conversation. What have I done, perhaps, to contribute to this thing that's caused anxiety in our relationship or in our home or at our office? Right? What have I contributed to this that maybe I didn't even realize, that maybe I even need to apologize for? Like this has happened so many times for me, where I go in thinking the conversation is going to go one way because I'm going to tell them, right? You've had those moments. I got to tell them. They clearly are incompetent and they don't understand what's going on, and I am God's gift to them to solve that problem and raise their awareness level, right? And I'm so fun to be around, right? And I go into the conversation with that mindset. And then if I do this work, which is not always, I have to admit, but when I'm in my healthiest place and I do this work, I recognize, oh, maybe there's something I have to learn in this conversation as well. Maybe I didn't set clear expectations if it's with work. Maybe I didn't own my part of the mess if it's something that I'm frustrated with the kids. Maybe it's something that in our relationship I didn't do what I said I was going to do, but man, it's so much easier to point out when she didn't, right? And so for us to go, what is happening in our relationship? Maybe I've hurt the other person. Maybe I haven't lived up to my end of the deal, right? What understanding do I need to seek? And then perhaps, again, as you ask those curious questions, you may discover that there are new boundaries you need to set. Whether that's together, hey, we're going to set a boundary around our finances or about our time or about, what we do with the children on the weekend, right? Or it's a boundary I need to set to have some distance from another person. Like, hey, this relationship might not be worth moving forward, or this working relationship may not be something I want to continue, right? Those are good things, but if you've done those first two steps, you can much more accurately assess what your relationship actually needs. And so if you're here and maybe you've been made to think that boundaries are not Christian because Jesus says love one another, let me tell you something. Boundaries are very Christian, right? Boundaries are good things. Boundaries are how I can love you and me simultaneously. And when Jesus says love your neighbor as you love yourself, you can love someone from afar if they're not healthy or they're not safe, right? Yeah. But it's important that we don't just jump to that first and foremost if we haven't done the work to say, what am I bringing to this relationship? Because again, if I'm doing my work, it makes it so much easier for us to do our work.
Yeah.
Right? It is so much harder for us to do our work or for you to do your work with your spouse or your roommate or your coworker or your neighbor. It is so much harder to do our work if I'm not doing my work and if you're not doing your work. So checking out your stories, checking in with yourself are important steps, prerequisites even, so you actually know where to start when it comes to assessing what your relationship actually needs. Because otherwise you may assess a problem inaccurately and run down a path that never solves the thing that you're feeling. Because here's the reality. When we do this, this is how we develop healthy communication with ourselves and with each other. And healthy communication is the fuel of healthy relationships. Healthy communication is what drives healthy relationships. You can run for a little bit on just chemistry and fun. But if you don't figure out how to have healthy communication, to get past those bumps, you're not going to make it over it.
Yeah.
You're not going to make it over those challenges. And this has probably been the area that pandemic has lifted to the surface for so many of us.
Yeah, I mean, to think about the uniqueness of these pandemic years, I mean, all of us over the last 2 years have collectively endured, this collective trauma, right? It's affected us all differently and uniquely, but we've all gone through something that has affected our marriage. It's affected our, work relationships. It's affected probably your family relationships with kids or grandkids. This has affected all of us. And so this might even be a helpful tool, maybe for those of you sitting in like, our marriage feels pretty strong right now, to even look at, some of these ways that even pandemic life has affected your relationship. Because how we interpret and how we apply what we've learned from this insane season might actually even inform some future growth that we might not even know is out there. But doing that work now is almost like a preventative measure, right? Seeking how we might need to seek forgiveness for something, even if it's seemingly small. For those of you, that maybe even just this series, we've been so proud of how many of you have reached out or asked for resources about counseling or, mentoring. So this just feels really exciting to see this content taking work. I feel like God is about to move in and through us in some really powerful ways, but doing this work, right? Taking, that list of what Ephesians 4 just outlined. Paul, when we look to that passage, right, there's like 5 different adverbs, like descriptive words that Paul uses in this passage. In Ephesians, right? The first, when we think about how do we fight, how do we have these conversations, how do we stay curious, how do we shift off the drama triangle into effective, this is coming straight out of this passage, right? To ask these questions when it comes to fighting fair, right? Is this true, right? Not just a blatant lie, but is there any part of me that is either deceiving myself or leaving out parts of the truth,
Which
right?
is what victims and heroes love to do.
Totally. But am I telling the whole truth? Am I willing to share something that maybe this is a little bit uncomfortable? Maybe I don't need to share this, but, even it's just the smallest thing that actually builds trust when we can be ruthlessly honest with one another. The next adverb is kindness, right? Not just is it true, but is the way that we're speaking to one another kind, right? If it's not true, or if it is true, but it's not said kind, rewind, right? There's a little fun. Rewind.
That's what we
Try it
teach our
again.
kids.
Have you ever said,
Kids
something
is
you're
doing
like,
that,
I need to say this. Oh man, okay, I said that wrong. Can I just rewind, change channel, and I'm gonna try again, do over, right? We all get that grace. We all get, to take a do-over every now and then. The next, description in that third paragraph is helpful, right? Does this actually, is sharing this, is talking about, is this moving us forward in our relationship? Is this helping us gain deeper understanding, right? And then in that fourth, that fourth paragraph, tender-hearted.
Love that.
Right? It's important to approach these conversations with tenderness, with care, because like I said, if it's not kind, if it's not helpful, even if it's true, but if it's not gentle, right, it can actually do more damage. Even if you're right, even if the thing the other person did was wrong, right? Do we approach it with a hardened heart or a soft heart? One that's willing to see the other person and want to actually understand and help them grow too. And then lastly, you can't miss it, forgiveness. Forgiveness is huge. When we're approaching a difficult, maybe conflict, those fights, those heated arguments, whatever words, descriptive you want to use, right? Are we going into the conversation with our heart bent towards forgiveness? At the end of the day, right, even if you're owning your 10% of the pie and they have the other 90%, are you still willing to say, hey, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I held on to that bitterness too long, and it made me act out in this way. But I was coming from a place of hurt, and I'm sorry, that was wrong. Will you forgive me? Right? We can own our peace, take responsibility for our peace, and if we're willing to move towards forgiveness, that is huge. That's how we move towards off the drama triangle into healing spaces in our relationships.
And my guess is, as you hear those 5 descriptors, right? Truthful, kind, helpful, tenderhearted, and forgiving. Part of you in your soul goes, man, I want to be in a relationship with someone like that. I want to work for someone like that. I want to live with someone like that. I want to be married to someone like that. Like all of us have that drive in us, right? And so here's the thing. Become that. Become that person. You're not going to get it right all the time. You're certainly not going to like just, oh, I heard a great message, and so click, right? It's done, right? It's going to take some practice, but try and seek to become those 5 things. When you find yourself spiraling on the drama triangle, when you find yourself in conflict in a relationship, when you find yourself saying something that it's not landing, it's not getting through, rather than doubling down and saying it louder or saying it stronger, to actually try softer and say, like, what do I need to grow in here? And to steal an idea from Andy Stanley, here's the thing, is the reason that we should start with this is because I know you, and you're the most emotionally evolved, healthiest person in your relationship. Like, you are. Because when you rehearse the thing that you're fighting with someone about, when you're rehearsing that argument with your spouse or that thing that happened, over the Zoom office, right? When you're in that moment, they're wrong and you're right, aren't you? Like, it's true. You are the healthiest person in the relationship. So the healthiest person in the relationship needs to take the first move, regardless of how it got here, regardless of who take us down through the drama triangle. It's our invitation. Again, Paul would say, because of what Jesus has done for us, it is our invitation to be the first to shift, even if it doesn't feel fair or even if it wasn't initially our fault, to ask the question, how can I be more truthful? How can I be more kind? How can I be more helpful? How can I be more tenderhearted, not hard-hearted against the person, but soft towards them? And how can I show up with forgiveness so that they don't have the pressure of having to get it right the first time, and neither do I.
Yeah.
That we show up as this type of person in our relationships and let the other person see that there's an opportunity to shift.
Yeah.
And so here's the homework, right? This week is to check your stories, to check in with yourself, and to check up on your most important relationships. To check in with yourself and check up on your most important relationships. Say, hey, here's a story I've been writing. We have this language with our staff. We definitely have it in our marriage. Hey, here's a story I've been writing. And the story goes like this, and here's why I've been writing it. And I'm sorry, that's probably an assumptive story. But could you help me clear it up? Like, it takes all of the octane out of the burner in that conversation. Right? And it just becomes a curious conversation. And when we do that, right, and perhaps even reading Ephesians 4:29-32 this week would be a great step, right? Just read that every day before you go to work and you have to interact with that person that drives you nuts. Read it every day before you see your kids or your spouse or whoever it is that's most difficult for you in your home, right? That whatever it might be, that we would say, hey, if I do this work to check out my story and check in with myself, I'm going to do a much better job checking up in my relationships and our communication. And therefore, our relationship as a whole is going to become so much more healthy and enjoyable.
Yeah.
So that's our hope and prayer for you, for ourselves this week as we step into this space.
Totally. And the truth is, friends, is that God actually opens up his heart to us. He invites us into communication with him, right? The thought that Jesus left every power, every privilege, that the closeness with God the Father to come, to enter into the mess with us, to get himself dirty, to step into difficult, challenging situations himself so that he could show us how. That's the God that came for us, that saw how we get stuck and came to rescue, came to model, came to show us a glimpse of this. And that's actually the God that invites us to talk to him, right, through prayer. God gives us a 24/7, 365 opportunity to come to approach him as a loving Father, right? So we're going to do just that. And as we pray today, we're going to kind of embrace a posture that we do around here, is holding our hands out as a way of saying, God, our hearts are open to you. God, we want what you have for us. So I'd invite you to just hold your hands out as we pray together. God, thank you so much that you give us your word, that your words, your communication to us reveals more and more to us about who you are, the kind of lover you are who pursues, who forgives, who never gives up, who steps into this covenant relationship like what we talked about last week of, even if you don't, I will. God, you are faithful. You carry your promises to fulfillment, and God, we are so grateful for that. We thank you, Jesus, that you entered into our world so that you can relate to us. That you didn't ask us to figure it out or approach you only when we have it figured out and when we've cleaned up our act. But God, we can approach you in the midst of our suffering, in the midst of our struggles. And God, I just thank you that you want to reveal yourself to us, that you want to help us have healthy relationships, and you gave us Jesus, you give us your Holy Spirit, God. So any of these friends who are here in this moment, God, anyone who just needs a reminder of your nearness, God, I just thank you that you give us that. I thank you that you are always present, you are always with us. It's simply our awareness that needs to tune into that. So God, I just pray that you would guide every single one of us this week as we go deeper into our relationships. I pray your protection over every marriage in this place, over every relationship, God. I pray your protection over our workplace relationships, our family relationships, God. Would you just bring out a flourishing and a health? Would you bring out forgiveness and deeper understanding, God, for all of these friends here today? And we pray all this in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Well, we're so glad you were here today. Thanks for joining us. We're going to continue in our worship experience by singing as well as giving back to God. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, we want you to know we hope you don't have any pressure that you feel by being here today. But for those of us that call Restoration Church home, we would love to invite you to give generously, and it's really to help us move forward in our relationships with God, but also move our mission forward to help people experience this beautiful framework, right? This beautiful idea that Jesus came to be with us and to connect us to God the Father. And so we make it really easy. You can give 3 ways around here. You can go to restorationchurchsd.com/give. You can give online instead of one-time or reoccurring giving. That's how our family chooses to do it. It's in the budget, so it's not a DMZ. You can use your cell phone and text any amount to the number 84321, or you can scan the QR code on the screen behind me, or there's some giving kiosks as you leave on your way out. But however it is you choose to give, we just want to say thank you so much. Your generosity not only makes a tangible difference in the lives of people here in San Diego, here that are a part of our Restoration Church community, but throughout the world, you are helping people have clean water and have safety and have all kinds of things because of your generosity. So thank you. Thank you for being a part of that. So we're going to sing together and worship this God that came to be with us, to be like us, and to model God for us. So why don't you stand if you're able, and let's sing together.